Welcome to Healing the Tigress, a podcast of stories and conversations on Asian American Pacific Islander maternal mental health. We are your hosts, Peggy, a licensed clinical social worker and certified breastfeeding peer counselor,
and Jasmine, a clinical pharmacist with a perinatal mental health certification. Both of us are Taiwanese American mothers and survivors of postpartum depression and anxiety.
We don't know about you, but we didn't grow up talking much about mental health in our families, and we want to change that now that we are mothers.
Together, with our clinical backgrounds and passion on the subject, we want to create a safe space for the AAPI community to discuss perinatal mental health issues.
And together, we want to break generational cycles in our own parenting journeys so that we can heal our inner tigress, a nod to the tiger moms before us. We are so happy you're tuning in here. Let's get started. Welcome back, listeners, to another episode of Healing the Tigress. Our next guest is someone who we knew we had to get on this podcast, if not for the pure commonality of our approach to the concept of the Tiger Mom. You may know her as Untigering on Instagram or from her book by the same name. Chen is a recovering tiger mother, parent coach, and founder of the Untigering movement. After seeing the negative effects of authoritarian parenting and unhealthy cultural expectations in her own life, she's now on a mission to promote mental health, peaceful parenting, and self-directed learning, especially among Asian communities. It just made sense for us to reach out to Iris, given we are both essentially trying to heal our inner tigresses. We are both untigering in a sense. While we have been longtime followers of Untigering, we are so honored to have a chance to have an intimate talk with Iris Chen herself about how she recovered from being a tiger mom and what it means to be untigering. Iris, we are so grateful to chat with you today. Please tell us a little bit about your cultural background, your upbringing, and your journey into motherhood.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So I am Chinese American, specifically Cantonese, even though I've lost a lot of my Cantonese after having lived in China for many years. But yeah, I'm a second generation immigrant, grew up in the States and in Canada. My dad is from Hong Kong. My mom is Chinese, but born and raised in Vietnam. And so we had, it's like a pretty typical second generation immigrant family growing up, um, where like we didn't have the term tiger parenting back then, but it was just among my Asian community, among my Chinese community. It was just the type of parenting most of us grew up with, where a lot of rules, a lot of expectations, um, expectations to be obedient, well behaved, stay out of trouble, get good grades, all of those things. And so I grew up with that type of parenting and did pretty well in that environment where I didn't get into a lot of trouble. I, did as I was told. I was the good girl. I did well in school. So I was able to meet all of those expectations in some ways. And I realized now, looking back, that it was a way for me to stay safe. Like being a good kid was a way for me to stay safe and for me to gain affirmation and acceptance and some attention. So those were the ways that I responded to my environment, whereas like some of my siblings responded differently to that environment by like, pushing back and rebelling or doing their own thing. So yeah, that was sort of my response. And my husband and I, after we got married, moved to China. We were like up for some adventure. And so we went as English teachers, planning on staying a year or two. We didn't want to have kids up there. That felt too scary for us. We're like, that's a little too Wild West for us. We're going to come back. But then once we got out there, we saw all these other families doing it. There's a lot of families in China and a lot of foreign families as well. And so after being there for a year, we decided to stay another year and then another year after that. And we ended up staying for 16 years. So
Oh
the
my
majority
gosh.
of my motherhood, even my adult life was spent overseas in China.
Wow.
Hmm.
And you're back now.
And I'm back now. We came back in 2019,
Okay.
right before the pandemic. So,
Right before
yeah.
the
Wow.
pandemic. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. That's when Peggy and I became mothers. So,
Oh, wow.
wow. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So that was, you know, just I spent my early motherhood really being away from my family and being
Mm.
surrounded by a culture that I was somewhat familiar with, but it was still, I was still a foreigner. In many ways, I grew up with a different worldview in many ways. And so um, that was a challenge, but at the same time, a huge blessing to be in what we would consider a third culture.
Mm.
So being outside of my own culture, and I wasn't really part of the local culture either. And so really needing to define for myself and my family, what is our culture going to look like? What are our traditions going to look like? Because we were already outsiders in many ways. And so like in some ways it gave us the freedom to define for ourselves what
Yeah.
what are we going to keep from
Mhm.
this culture? What are we going to keep from this culture? And uh, yeah, just meld it together in a way that made sense for our family.
It felt like the tiger parent worked for you as a child, but I wonder if, as you're going into parenting, you know, if you had in your mind, well, that worked for me. I knew what rules to follow and stuff. And I'm assuming maybe that's what you jumped into. Like that's what you know when you start parenting. Like how did you first approach parenting, and especially as you're trying to navigate this in China?
Yeah. So growing up, I knew how to stay out of trouble and survive in that environment. And in many ways, it served me. And so there were things that I recognized, like I didn't want to be as permissive as these white quote unquote families that I knew. But I didn't want to be like a tiger parent or like totally hardcore. Like I was not allowed to date. I wasn't allowed to go out with friends in many ways. Like it was like pretty hardcore. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to be like that, but I still expect my children to obey me.
Mhm.
um, and so I went into parenting knowing that I would, loosen up, but still have high expectations of my kids, still expect them to obey, still expect excellence from them,
Mhm.
just tone it down a little and say, I love you, give them hugs, stuff like that.
Mhm.
Um, and when it came down to it, especially with my first child, who was a very sensitive child who got overwhelmed and anxious easily,
Mm.
um, but I didn't read it as that. Like, I didn't
Mm.
recognize it as sensitivity or as being overwhelmed or anxious. I read it as disobedience and
Mhm.
as like willful rebellion. And why are you not just listening to me? Why is this such a big deal? Why are you having a tantrum in the middle of the street? And so my response was just to come in and try to punish that out of him or try to
Mm.
control the behavior, because those were the only ways that I grew up knowing how to manage behavior. Right, it was like very much through a behavior management lens where you see bad things that your child is doing and then you try to control it.
Mhm.
um,
It's very black and white.
and
Like your kid is good or your kid
yes,
is bad. There's nothing in
Right.
between, right?
Right.
right, exactly.
Being in a foreign country where it's kind of the culture to do so, maybe put a little pressure on you too to demand the same sort of obedience as you're seeing other people doing with their kids, maybe.
Yeah. The interesting thing is like there's been so much cultural change in China where they had
Mhm.
the one child policy. And
Oh, that's right.
so the children became like what they call little emperors or little empresses because they were
Oh,
coddled, they were spoiled. Um,
Wow.
but there's also that like need for control. So in
Mm.
many ways, I feel like the immigrant communities who came over in the 70s and 80s, like in the past when culture wasn't changing as fast, had more traditional views in some ways
oh,
than the modern families in China. Like it's actually
wow,
really different.
wow.
So the what we saw there, of course, I was living in a city of like 14 million people. There's a whole spectrum of parenting. There's like a very permissive, very like quote unquote spoiling type of parenting, and then there's the neglectful, and then there's the whatever. But what we saw often was like a lot of yelling, a lot of
Mm,
control, and like also this communal everybody's in everybody's business type of thing. Like if something happened
Ah,
in public, you might get attention from other people trying to, um, try to like calm the child down, or which can be good or bad.
right.
Sometimes everybody's in your business, and other times it's like, yeah, I need more
Like,
support.
let me handle this, right? Like,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
and do you feel like you mentioned how your son was like more sensitive, and it took a while for you to actually understand, this is kind of his personality, right? I'm not just trying to like squash this disobedience out of him or something, or sort of disrespect. And can you maybe share with us like how old were your children like when you started to take a different approach, or what was that sort of turning point for you
Mm.
like?
Yeah. I think a huge turning point for me was when my oldest was probably around 8 and my youngest was 6. So I had been
Mhm,
really doing the tiger mom thing for quite a while at that point. I hadn't learned my lesson. I was still digging in my heels trying to like control them and get them to behave. And I went to a parenting workshop, and the speaker was talking about just childhood development and neurobiology. And
mhm,
I don't know why I had read a lot of books about parenting, but maybe a lot of them were from like the behavior management type angle. And
mhm,
this was the first time anybody brought any science into into parenting, and it was so eye opening for me, just like the science behind it, the biological development of our children, where um, just their brains and bodies are responding to outside stimuli. So when we are yelling at them, when we are punishing them, we're creating more fear and threat in their life, then they're going to respond through their survival mechanism, that fight, flight, freeze, fawn mechanism.
mhm,
And so that's where I saw a lot of the quote unquote misbehavior coming in, where he was just melting down or screaming or fighting back or crying or throwing things, because his brain, that part of his like instinctual survival brain, was just like stimulated and going haywire, and he couldn't calm down. Even though
Mhm.
I told him to calm down, and even though I like made it more painful for him not to like to continue this type of behavior, like he just couldn't quote unquote obey, because his thinking logical brain went offline.
they're dysregulated in that moment, right?
Yes, absolutely. And so that was so helpful for me to understand, because like the framework that I had been operating on was one just of good behavior, bad behavior, right? Good behavior
Mhm,
should be rewarded and praised, and bad behavior should be punished and dealt with. And it wasn't taking into account like the reality of my child's experience and how I could approach him with more empathy and understanding and help him to regulate instead of just expecting him to be regulated and making it even more difficult for him to regulate by yelling or punishing or all of those things. So, I mean, up until that point, we had still been using, our tiger parenting strategies to try to control behavior. So we had been yelling and punishing, we had been spanking up until that point. And I think like that light bulb moment for me at that parenting workshop just convinced me immediately that I had to stop, specifically spanking. I saw just how, I don't know. I had never really interpreted it as abusive. Obviously, I wouldn't have done it if I thought it was abusive. Like I grew up in, sort of conservative Christian environments where that was considered good parenting, and so this was the first time where I just suddenly woke up to the fact of how harmful it was, how disconnecting it was. And so I went home that day and I just told my partner, I've got to stop this cold turkey. I have to stop it now. And I can't ever go back to it because I now see what I've been doing. So that was a huge turning point. But of course, like the whole reason why I've called this process for myself untigering is that it is a process. It's like a daily journey that I, even now, however many years later, I feel like I'm still going through. So there are definitely those moments that wake us up. And then there's like the daily work that we have to do as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you've sort of phrased that well, because it's like you have in your head this notion, I have this goal, I want to get better, right? But it's not going to happen overnight. And you do have to put in that work. And it is hard work because you are undoing a lot of the things that you were wired as a kid. You found security in this identity of being the good kid. And you wanted that for your kids because you thought that would bring them safety. But now you're learning, something totally different. And thanks for sort of bringing up that term of the untigering that you've created. How would you actually describe the process of untigering and sort of what encompasses untigering?
Yeah. So in my book, I sort of talk about it in a twofold process because it's not just the way we parent our children, but it's also like healing from the way that we were parented. Because a lot of the work that we're doing as parents has to do with healing our inner child, healing our relationship with ourselves, healing our relationship with our parents, if that's possible. And so it's definitely this intergenerational thing where these systems of authoritarianism and using power and domination in relationships and normalizing that type of power dynamic in relationships is part of the work of untigering, where tiger parenting is very authoritarian, hierarchical, top down, controlling, all of those things. Untigering is really relearning that, learning how not to use our power to be in um, to use our power in abusive ways in our relationship. And so, yeah, it has to do with healing our relationship with ourselves and the past generations and also with our children. And like something that you mentioned earlier, in terms of it being a process, like tiger parenting is really approaching things with this really high standard, right? Like this external, in many ways, arbitrary standard of how things should be, quote unquote, of the ideal of what perfection is. And so even through this process of untigering, we can't tiger parent ourselves through the
Mm-hmm.
process of having these expectations of ourselves to be perfect, peaceful parents, to never yell, to always be kind and loving and empathetic or whatever. I think those are just really unrealistic, unfair expectations for us and just cause more shame and more guilt. And so like how to approach ourselves in this moment, even as we're integrating with a lot of compassion, a lot of acceptance and unconditional love, instead of trying to tiger parent ourselves to become better parents.
That's such a good point, though, that you're making, that, because we're raised in this, environment that we expect to be perfect already as it is. So it's like, okay, now I'm going to take that to the next level. Like my parenting has to be perfect. My untigering has to be perfect, right? Which is like a really good point to bring up, that we have to give ourselves grace, that no one's going to be a perfect parent, that we're going to make mistakes along the way. But there is this one thing you said about like the power. And I actually was listening to, I had heard your conversation with Jenny Wang about this whole process. And you said something that stood out to me, that was partnership over power, which I thought was really powerful. Is that, you have to remember this with your kids, is this is a partnership, right? I'm not trying to like manipulate or control you. Like I'm a part, we're partners in this together. And I have to, work with you to help, you get to the point you need to be. That's the whole point of being a parent. And I think sometimes we kind of we may lose sight of that sometimes when we're overcome with like rage, or we're overcome with like just the daily grind of parenthood, right? We kind of lose sight of that sometimes.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we forget that children are humans, that they are
Mm-hmm.
their own people. And
Yeah.
how are you in relationship with other people? Not through control, not through, yeah, just trying to control their every move. Like, you would never describe your relationship with a friend or a partner or a coworker in those ways, or engage with peers in the ways that we often engage with children, which is
Yeah.
through power. And so I think
Right.
that's something that we really need to question and challenge. Like, how can we actually be in loving relationship with our children, not in power over ways, but in power sharing ways, which is what I mean
Mm.
by partnership. Because sometimes people, when they say partnership, they're like, um, they see it as like an equality thing, where I mentioned it in my book, I see it as an equity thing. So it's
Mm-hmm.
not like 50-50 and everybody gets an equal say or whatever it is, like I think it's a dance, it's communication, it's like seeing what's relevant in that particular situation. But it is about equity. So of course, those who are more vulnerable, those who need more support, hopefully can get more support. And children are the ones in like a parent, like an adult child relationship, who do need more support, who do need more sensitivity. And so it is the responsibility of the adult in that relationship to provide that, and not expect the child to be like our friend or our emotional support or like
Mm-hmm.
that. So yeah, but definitely, how can we share more power with children?
And I feel like in this process of like parents healing from, or trying to do different, right? Like maybe they've already gone into the whole parenting thing thinking, I am going to do different already, right from the get go. And since our podcast kind of focuses on maternal mental health, I wonder if you think that untigering actually plays a role in mental health of mothers who maybe were immigrant children themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because I think um untigering again is about that healing process. Like, you don't even have to be a mother to begin to heal your inner child, or your relationship with yourself and
Mm-hmm.
your parents. But I think it's totally related, because again, those messages, um, those beliefs about ourselves that we grew up with, in that environment, have to do with identity, have to do with worth, have to do with like our sense of self. And so I think as we heal those, that definitely affects our mental health as moms. And I think I shared on my social media pages before, like why it's hard for overachievers to be mothers.
Mm-hmm.
um, And like that overachieving energy is much of what we received if we were tiger parented,
Mm-hmm.
as children of immigrants and other people as well, of again, high expectations of standards of perfection, of feeling like you need to be in control, all of those
Mhm.
things. And all of those things make motherhood really hard because we aren't in control and we can't do things perfectly. And so I know, that one thing that I wrote in my book is that like motherhood ruined my straight A reputation. Whereas like before that, I felt like I was in control. I felt like you told me what to
Yeah.
study. I studied it. I aced the
Yes.
test. And then suddenly, like this little human is in my life, and I don't know what I'm doing, and I can't ace it. I don't
Yeah.
like. There's
There
just
was
so
no
many,
amount
and
of studying that could have prepared you. I think I noticed that with like both me and Jasmine's own stories of like, for me, I was like, well, okay, I'm a mental health professional, so I can prepare all I can to not get postpartum depression, only to get like
oh,
blindsided by postpartum anxiety. Or with Jasmine, trying to figure out like, I've been able to accomplish all these things so far and had, pregnancy and everything go well so far. And again, get blindsided by something that we just didn't have any preparation for. But all our lives were like you said, we're not getting an A in this. Oh my gosh, this is like, and even to think that way, like I
No.
have to get this
Yeah.
right. And there's no way to really get it right because every baby is different. Every
Yeah.
mother's relationship is different. And it's so funny because it's that you're right, that overachiever. We look at motherhood, especially new motherhood, as just another test
Mhm.
to pass, another
To ace.
thing to ace. And
Yeah.
I've had other Asian American friend moms tell me the same thing. They're like, I usually if I just do this, this, and this, I can figure it out. But this is the one thing I haven't been able to figure out.
Yeah, it totally is. I felt like I was failing. Like I was miserably failing at motherhood, and I think that threw me into even more depression. My body was malfunctioning. It just felt like everything was not working. I wasn't able to sleep. So it's like, what's wrong with my body? What's wrong with like my breasts? What's wrong with the why can't I figure this out? This one thing that's like a basic primal human thing women have been doing for
mm,
eons, and for some reason I can't do this right. And you're right. It's that also that thing we've grown up with where it's like I'm expected to just be good at everything. I can study it and ace it. But there's no manual. There's no manual in motherhood. And your manual is going to look different than Peggy's manual or like, the next person's manual. And every baby is going to be different in how you're going to handle them. So, I just remember thinking like, with the breastfeeding or the pumping, I was like, why is it never a straight answer of how long I should be pumping for or breastfeeding for? Like, the answer varies all the time. A different lactation consultant is going to tell me something totally different. And I'm like thinking, it's because every baby's different. There's no straight answer.
yeah, which is so frustrating. It's
Yeah,
so,
it is.
it feels very like you're lost, like you're falling into space when we're used to having those manuals and the scripts
Mm-hmm.
and like the answer at the back of the book, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
and you can't approach another human being like that. It doesn't work like that. And so, yeah, I think it has so much to do with our mental health as mothers, where it's really about, again, compassion for ourselves, understanding our unconditional worth apart from our ability to do things right or to do things perfectly. And like the way you described it is like, what's wrong with me, right? Like when we approach life with, the expectation that we should do things right, that we should do things well, untigering is like really resisting all of that and trusting that we are unconditionally worthy, unconditionally loved and valued apart from any of that. And so, like, if something messes up, that's okay. If our body is like not, or like, why is breastfeeding so painful? Instead of asking like, what's wrong with me or what's wrong with my body, um, like, what if we approached it more like, what is my body telling me, or what do I
Mm.
need? Like, just so much more compassion towards ourselves instead of like more shame, more berating of ourselves to try to like, you know like preserve our image or whatever it
Yeah.
is that we're trying to
Yeah.
preserve.
the image thing too, you're right, is that we've all grown up with as Asians is, we have to present this great image, save face, right? And it's not just for yourself, but your image reflects upon your parents' image. And so it's like this whole pressure of you're holding everyone's image on yourself. It becomes a lot. It's a huge burden.
And that shame piece.
And I think that's why what you're doing on this podcast is so beautiful too, because it's sort of coming out of hiding. Because what we need to do is be more vulnerable with one another. If we're all trying to preserve that face and like show everybody we've got it together, our kids are great, our family's great, motherhood is great, that's just like not honest, right? And so, how can we be more honest, tell more stories of vulnerability, and just saying how hard things are sometimes, so that it's safer for all of us to show our true selves.
I think our tiger parents didn't provide that either, right? That vulnerability. And so we almost get to reparent a whole generation of AAPI moms by showing these examples. Because I think Jasmine and I, we've talked about this before in other episodes. We don't know much about our own mothers' postpartum journeys because that was, like you said, kept hidden. Whether or not there were any postpartum depression, they were never told to us about. Either they didn't know or they just kept it inside. I definitely had my mom telling me, oh, yeah, pregnancy was great. And I didn't feel this way after I had a baby. But how much of that is, again, you have to hide it and you don't talk about it, or how much of it also is, just not enough information about it. And so you go into parenthood with no real examples of like the things that are going to be really hard. And there's no example of that vulnerability. And so thank you for saying that about our podcast.
Yeah.
One thing we loved is that your website said Untigering is this global movement. And I know, because you've spent a majority of your parenting journey in China. So, I guess if you could compare, or, you've already sort of mentioned some of those differences and whatnot. How did you take the different parts of those cultures to be your own for your kids? Because you said you were sort of trying to blend it or make it your own journey.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's so helpful having lived overseas, being a bicultural, multicultural person. It's so important for us to see ourselves as non-binary, like we don't have to choose. We're not one or the other. We're part of a spectrum. And I think living overseas definitely just gave me perspective on that, in terms of I'm not one or the other. I can be both, and I don't have to take everything, especially like the toxic parts of the different cultures. I can really um, see who I am. I think just recognizing that culture is something man-made. Culture is something that we create as humans. And so how can I have agency in creating culture, whether that's like my own little community or the greater culture? And so I think the things that I really love about Asian culture is just the collective identity, the interconnectedness, the intergenerational aspects of it, the learning from the wisdom of elders, ancient traditions. Like all of those are things that I really resonate with. Um, even even like the respecting of elders, that's something that
Mm-hmm.
I I feel drawn to, just when it's done non-coercively, right? When
Yeah.
it's something that like comes out of like true love and respect out of my heart, and something instead of something demanded
Mm-hmm.
arbitrarily and used abusively from the top down. So those are things that I really value. The, like, of course, there's always a flip side, this idea of harmony, of yeah, just caring for one another. But then there's always the flip side, when it's like taken to to the extremes, where you don't address wrongs, you don't stand up for justice, you stay quiet and submissive, all of those things. So again, like holding all of that intention and navigating through that in community and in relationship with others. I think in terms of like quote unquote American um, cultural values, I think definitely the idea of autonomy, agency, um, self-actualization, all of those things. One thing that I did mention is, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Mhm.
And I mentioned in my book that Maslow actually got it from the Blackfoot tribe of
Oh,
Canada. And
Oh.
and self-actualization is actually on the bottom. And it's a very communal view of self-actualization. So it's not individualistic. It just goes on. And at the top is cultural perpetuity. So the purpose
Hmm.
of like being self-actualized is to serve the community, is to be a part of a collective that is growing in personal and collective liberation so that it grows in this. Yeah, so your culture can continue to grow and perpetuate. And so I really love that view of self actualization, um, because it's not that self actualization isn't important, but it's done within the context of community and of our service to the greater whole.
I love that, but I'm also stewing that Maslow colonized his hierarchy of needs.
Totally. Check it out.
I refer to that so much because, I was a psychology major and I'm like, today is the first time I learned this. So I'm just like, what? The Blackfoot one makes
Yes.
much more sense.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
I also loved that you did mention just kind of there are parts of the Asian identity that is very valuable, and those are things that I think are so beautiful too. The collective piece, and there is like you said, it's not binary. You don't have to say like I'm going to throw out all aspects of tiger momming or whatever. Obviously, there are largely toxic parts of it, but it isn't just one or the other. It is, like you mentioned earlier, this third culture, which feels so unique to our generation because most of our parents, if we're children of immigrants, never had to really have a bicultural lens if they just grew up in the country they were born in and their parents are born in, their grandparents are born in. And so it's a very new journey for us, not just as individuals, but us journeying through this lens of cultures, even as mothers. And it's nice to kind of feel like you don't have to choose, but also like it's still a process. I think there's still moments where I'm balancing the different values of Western culture and Eastern culture and figuring that out.
There's not one right or wrong,
Right,
right?
right.
Like Iris is saying, like I also like that you acknowledged that we're not just trying to like strip off everything of our Asian identity that was
Mm-hmm.
like that we thought was bad or anything, or that even like you said, even respect like might seem like, yeah, you're right, if it's demanded, that's not true respect, right? But the fact that we do respect our elders because there's this sort of culture around that, that is really important, I think. Because, like you said, with your elders comes that wisdom that you can only gain from them. There's so much to be learned from our elders, actually. So, yeah, and I hope you don't mind me asking this little bit off. We're pivoting just a little bit, but do you feel like as a mom in a different country, like that you, and because you mentioned like, you didn't have your family around you, your mom around you, do you feel like it was hard for you and you went through some sort of mental health um, downsides as well, or where you felt like it was, maybe you went through some sort of postpartum things that were more hard on your mental health?
Yeah. I mean, it was very challenging, and I don't I sort of have selective amnesia about that time. I think sort of like mommy brain, but it was definitely hard because again, I was coming from being an independent person who had a lot of freedom to do what she wanted with her life, and all of a sudden, like I felt like my body belonged to somebody else, my time,
Mhm.
my identity. So much of that was like in turmoil, and I didn't. I felt like I probably became a hermit
Oh
in many
no.
ways
Mhm.
during the early years because for one thing, it's like culturally it's hard to go out and be, just to function. And like language wise, I was still learning the language in many ways. And so it felt scary to go out into the world and need to, manage my child and get groceries and all of that. So I probably stayed home a lot and had a lot of fear about going out into the world and being in the world with my child. And because his behavior was so unpredictable, that was also like perhaps made my world even smaller, where I was like, I just don't want to go out and not know if he's gonna like run off or throw something or get into
Or
something with
tantrum in
another
public,
kid.
right? Like,
Yeah.
you don't want anyone
Yeah.
to see that. Yeah.
It happened a lot.
Yeah.
And I would always like call my husband, just like, this is what happened. Your child this, your child.
It's always their child when they're tantruming.
Everything's my husband's fault. But yeah, it was very challenging. But I will say, like, in the long run, I think living away from my family was good for us because again, it's again that nurturing of another type of culture, or like defining for ourselves what our family culture is going to look like with fewer voices, fewer, in like strong influences, pressures maybe. So I'm grateful for a little bit of distance. So like whenever you're wanting to break cycles, sometimes you have to get out of that environment in order to break the cycle. Otherwise you're still spinning, spinning in the same ways. And so I am, even though it was hard, like having a little bit of distance was also really good for us.
I feel like I just had a light bulb go off when you said that, because it's like, oh, maybe you were able to untiger because you were away. Like if you were in this environment still where your mom was around, maybe she'd be saying things to you about how you should be parenting, how your kids should be doing X, Y, Z, why are they not behaving? And you would never have been able to break out of that mold. So that's cool that you just said that. And I was just like, oh, epiphany. Like, yes.
Yes, in many ways, I totally think that it was because we were living in China that I was able to untiger, specifically with the unschooling part, where we were not doing traditional education in any sense of the word. And so I think if our family was around, they would be like asking a lot of questions, like, just projecting a lot of fear and worry onto us. But we were like thousands of miles away. What could they do?
Right.
And so it did give us a lot of freedom to like experiment and play around and figure out what worked for our family.
You mentioned unschooling. And I know we probably don't have time to go deep into that. Do you want to like briefly tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Because it has the word school in it, people think it just means like no school. And in some ways it is, but unschooling is really a way of life living with children that is most like decenters school, decenters school, because like most families, like school is so central to the way they live their lives. It just sort of defines their whole family culture and their lifestyle and their rhythms. And what does it look like to decenter that system and instead attune to the needs and desires and passions and drives and interests of the family and of each individual? So for us, that looks like very like thinking outside the school system, thinking of learning and living outside the school system. So for us, that means like we don't do grades, we don't do homework, we don't have arbitrary curriculum that we make our children do, we don't have core standards or tests, things like that. We just trust that learning is natural, that children are naturally curious, that they learn through life, that learning is most meaningful when it is intrinsic and self driven. And so we support our children in following their interests and learning through life.
It's like a untigering of the family system within the school system.
Yeah.
Yeah, to me, it's very aligned
Mhm.
with peaceful parenting and untigering. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
How was that transition back from China to the States
Mm.
and and your kids? Like what at what stage I guess I can't, my math is not very good. Are they adjusting well to being back here?
Yeah, so my children are like full-blown teens now,
Wow.
and when we came, they were like tweens. Um, and the adjustment has gone surprisingly smoothly. And even though, COVID hit, soon after we came back, but
Mhm.
I think what stayed the same was our family.
Mm.
And because there was that core family culture, that core experience that stayed consistent, even though the environment was changing. I think that like gave them a lot of stability, and yeah, so I'm really grateful for that. They're doing really well, and um, have adjusted pretty well to coming back here.
It sounds like the work you put in untigering them in China really set them up for success in this transition.
Yeah, I'm hoping so. But I do want to say again, like a lot of things are out of our control,
Right.
right? And so
Mhm.
so part of it is again releasing my need for control or for a guaranteed sort of outcome where like so many things could have gone wrong. So many like it's not that our children will never struggle again
Mhm.
if we just because we're doing things like what we think is quote unquote right, that doesn't mean our children won't struggle. And so like releasing ourselves of that expectation and just taking things as they come. And I think if we that helps ease the transition, or not just the transition, but any challenge that
Mhm.
we experience in life with ourselves or with our children, to not sort of see it through a lens again of like what is wrong, like what am I doing wrong or
Mhm.
what's wrong with him, but just like like this is life can be messy and hard sometimes. How can I respond to the situation? How can I meet the need? What is going on, and to meet the moment.
Mhm.
Well, I mean, you still had to pivot when you guys came back because, like you said, you weren't expecting
The pandemic.
a global pandemic as well when you got back. So I'm sure you had all these plans
Yeah.
for when you were going to be transitioning back. And then that probably all got uprooted and you had to pivot again
Mhm.
to figure out what you guys were going to do. So it seems like though your kids are probably pretty malleable and like adjustable, like they're resilient because they've been through so many of these sort of like waves and changes. And that you are really setting them up for success. So that's really great to hear.
Yeah, thank you. I think another thing that brought up for me as you were saying that is like again this unschooling perspective on life, where again um we're not controlled by the system. We're not like the system is very rigid, and we're trying to submit to the system. Whereas unschooling is like, okay, the system is there to serve me or to serve us when needed, but
Mhm.
I'm not married to the
Mhm.
system.
I like
So
that.
like even coming back, where if I had an agenda, if I said within this many months I need this to happen, within a year this is what I envision. I think like maybe in business that works, but I think sometimes
Mhm.
in life that sets us up for again disappointment and frustration, because then a global pandemic hits, and then
Right.
what? And so
Right.
like part of it again is like an unschooly way of living, is what is happening in the moment, how can I respond to the moment, how can I attune to myself, attune to the needs of what I'm going through. So, like in the moment, I'm not going to be stressed out about my child um, getting a certain grade
Mhm.
on a test because we're going through a global pandemic. I am going to be
Mhm.
worried about health, about
Mhm.
connection, about mental health, and all of those things. So again, like really attuning and being sensitive to what's actually happening in our world instead of having these like expectations or standards that we just plow through and try to like meet regardless of what's happening in the world around us.
I feel like so much of what you just said also encompasses like motherhood, like going into motherhood and these expectations that we have going into it as well. So a lot of the similar themes I'm hearing. And so I thank you for sort of laying that out right now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Iris, thank you so much for your time with us. Where can people find more of you? I know you know you have your book, you have your Instagram. Is there anywhere else you hang out, like to be found? Website, anything? Any other
Yes.
books coming up?
I also post on Facebook. The content on Instagram and Facebook are the same. And then my
Mhm.
website is untigering.com. So you can sign up for to be on my mailing list there as well. So those are the places I mostly hang out. I do have an upcoming unschooling book that I'm working on.
Mm. So
So we'll see
that was
when that comes out.
totally not planted, listeners. I did not know. I just kind of, was like, man, all of our guests are so
All
accomplished.
of our guests
I'm
have
like,
second books coming out. Like, what's happening?
I
No, but I've been saying this for like 3 years now, so
Mhm.
we'll see how far I get. But that's the plan. It's in the works. So
And do you still work with
Very
families
nice.
as a parent coach as well, or?
yes, I do work with families. I especially like to work with Asian
Mm.
American families, and so yeah, come check me out on my website. And if yeah, like I really want to work mostly with families that are trying to make this shift, like who've grown up or experienced a lot of power over type of parenting and are looking for ways to share power with their children.
Well, your book is on my reading list too, so
Mhm.
I have a lot of books to go through. And I find it's interesting. I just sort of got back into reading last year, but I find that I've been picking up books by Asian
Mhm.
writers, like the ones I had thought of, like, oh, I need to go back and read these things. A lot of them tend to be Asian writers, and I don't know if that was just kind of a happenstance coincidence, but yours is on the
Mhm.
list too. So we'll link those in our show notes so people can find you.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, and just I guess as a wrap up, we usually like to end our episodes with everyone sort of just going around and sharing what they want to do for their mental health this week, as sort of some ideas for listeners of things they can do. And I know I see you're trying to think there, so I'm not going to make you go first. I'll put you on the spot, but you can think about it. Um, I have one in mind, so I'll just go first so that you guys can think about what you want to say. Um, this is kind of random, but little, and but it's been making a difference. I had started making my bed, and I know that sounds like I'm a slob, but I have to say, since becoming a mom, like you just roll out of bed and just go with it. My house is messy, and I often do not make my bed. But after I did my laundry last week, I was like, you know what? Like, it's bright and airy in this room. It's like the new year. You're cleaning for the Lunar New Year and stuff. I was just like, you know what? I'm gonna make the bed after I did all the sheets and everything. I was like, yeah, this is really nice. My husband came home, was like, wow, our room looks really nice. I was like, yeah, it does. And then I decided the next day, I was like, I'm gonna do this again. I'm gonna do this again. And I've been doing it for a week now. And it's been really nice. Just like a few minutes just to do it. And it kind of makes it nicer when I walk into the room and I'm like, oh, it actually looks a little bit neat, at least in this tiny little corner of my house. So that's my mental health thing for the week. And please don't judge me for being messy most of the time.
They do say there's something to be said about organizing the space you're in that helps your mental health. And like if your
Mhm.
space is organized and not cluttered, you feel less cluttered even in your mind. So I think that's a good one.
Yeah.
Mine is really more something I'm trying to do more this year in general, but I'm definitely going to try to do it this week as well. But I used to cook a lot more before having a kid, and I loved it. I think for some people, maybe like, oh, it's got to cook, feels like a chore. And not that we have a very like uh, traditional sense where like I have to cook because I'm the wife, but it's just more something I enjoy. But I haven't done it a lot. And so I think even for health reasons, wanting to cook fresh meals versus just popping something from the freezer, and no shame in doing that because some days you're just too busy and we're working moms and it's just what you got to do. But I really find something kind of even therapeutic in the act of cooking. And I remember I once even would listen to different meditation and mindfulness meditations, and there was like a mindful cooking one, and I was like, oh. And it even involved things like as you're preparing the ingredients, like thinking about where these ingredients came from, imagine where they grew, and kind of there's this like a ritual even in the act of cooking that lets you appreciate, lets you be like thankful for what you're able to eat. And so I'm trying to be more intentional with cooking and try to do it more with whatever time I have left to do it. So that's what I'm going to try to do more.
That's great.
Iris?
I love those. Well, definitely no shame because my bed is not made today. So,
like I said, it has been made for like years. So,
I think the thing that came to mind is actually like a practice that we've been doing for years, and that's just to go out for my daily walk. So I'm very much a homebody. I could stay, like, pandemic wasn't that hard for me in terms of like being homebound. I could stay home for a long time. But yeah, it's just I feel so much better when I go on our daily walk. And we usually do it as a family. Just get out of the house and be outdoors. And I think I realized like I get really nourished by being in nature. But it's just like the inertia of being at home sometimes is hard for me to get out. But I want to be more intentional about being out in nature and like actively seeking out beauty in the world.
And it's hard in the winter, I think, because it's just like colder, the days are darker like sooner, and it's harder to get out. But it's nice that you guys make it a family thing, I think, because that'll be probably something that your kids look back on as well. Yeah. Well, thank you, Iris, for your time. This was so lovely to have this chat, and we're really honored that you were able to spend some time with us today to talk all about the Untigering, especially since, like Peggy said, especially with your name and our name, like we sort of had to, reach out, and you're one of our like big dream guests. So like, thank you for like making this happen for us.
Well, it was such an honor. It was great talking to both of you. Thank you for having me.
We hope you have enjoyed Healing the Tigress in our conversations on maternal mental health in the Asian American Pacific Islander community. Please follow our show and our Instagram page to catch our latest episodes. We have so many fantastic guests and deep topics that we are so excited to cover soon.
If you enjoyed this episode or would like to support us more, please leave us a rating or a review and share this podcast with a friend to spread the word. Check out the show notes for more links. Thanks for joining us today, and we hope these conversations will help our AAPI mothers heal their inner tigress and honor their mental health as they deserve to. See you next time.